This is the Degenesis Clan Wars. It's a scenario-driven game where it's one versus all. It's also in a barren post-apocalyptic world. In fact, this game's world deserves some screen time. It's the year 2598, and after asteroids fell from the sky, destroying everything, the world restabilized through the Protectorate, a government that is the last beacon of civilization. So this is kind of like Mad Max, except now we're in Europe instead of Australia. The government Protectorate is trying to hold against the cockroach clan, which are a bunch of dudes from outside the realm. That government Protectorate will do anything to keep power, including slaughtering the cockroach clan, which lost its territory and tons of people to the Protectorate. What this means in game terms for this Ameritrash game is that the many will be playing as the few and playing as a couple of operatives. And they're decked out ranger-like dudes who just have a ton of abilities and cool items. They're trying to complete an interesting mission. Then the cockroach clan will be controlled by the other team called the Hostile. Zoomed out, Degenesis Clan Wars is a tactical skirmish game with all these minis. There's a lot of information in the scenario booklet, and it's between 2 to 5 players and plays in about 1.5 to 2.5 hours per scenario. What we're reviewing here is a prototype of the full game, where we completed the preview mission booklet. There's a much bigger booklet than what we cover. We also got sent this operative expansion with 12 more characters. And while we only stuck to the core game characters, we'll be covering the expansions a little bit during this review, but our scores at the end won't reflect the new characters. Oh, also, this is a sponsor review from SixMoreVodka, who also worked with Cool Mini or Not to sponsor our previous playthrough of Degenesis. And we never compromise our scores here at Shelfside, but if that type of sponsor thing bothers you, of course, feel free to click off anytime. How to play. You play Degenesis in a bunch of missions with different objectives for the two teams. Let's just look at the first mission here, where the operative team, which is the team with less minis, is trying to kill 5 cockroaches to reveal the next objective for them. The hostile is just trying to kill all the operatives. We'll play the game by trading off rounds, which consist of each team doing a set of actions. Operatives are given something called edges at the beginning of rounds, which they can spend 1 up to do 2 actions. Then they give the edge to the hostile player, who can do 1 action or pass. So as an operative with your 2 actions, you can do things like moving, picking up items, or flipping over your character from the primal side to the focus side, or vice versa. We'll just explain 2 important examples of actions. We got attacking, where you attack with the weapon you're carrying. Then you choose something within range and line of sight and see their defense, which becomes the difficulty of the roll. You roll d6s from your character's stats and items, which are certain combinations of outcomes. The riskier the die, the more chance you can roll a botch, which, if this symbol isn't a roll at all, it immediately fails the check. Anyways, if a dice roll for attacking succeeds, the target is wounded. Cockroaches only have 1 health, so they die right away. If an operative is wounded, you flip over one of your potential cards, which are like passives and health. If you can't flip, you lose a potential. If operatives have no potentials, they die. The second example action is called scouting, to reveal the cockroach's player's units, which always enter the game face down and are called threats. Some can even be traps or decoys. Scouting means you choose a tile to which you have line of sight of, then you roll for it. The difficulty is equal to the distance to the chosen tile. If you succeed, you can reveal a threat token here. Now many go on board. The hostile gets 1 action per edge, doing things like moving and attacking. Heck, they have a lot of actions available from their secret player board. They can also spawn a threat according to the mission restrictions. Remember, threat is face down unit. Oh yeah, it's good for the hostile to keep their units face down, because if they get in the same space as an operative, they can reveal themselves for immediate free action, like probably an instant attack. Lastly, both sides have access to this Arcana deck, which are uber strong cards that can be played at any time. The hostile can specifically get them via the operatives buying intel at the start of a mission. Then operatives can each start with a specific one. To see more during a scenario, both operatives and hostile can decide to let their opponent draw an Arcana card if you secure, which negates a botch, or overcommit, which adds die of your choosing to the dice roll. Oh, also when any mini is in the same space as enemies, if they try to run away or do a ranged attack, they get sucker punched. This means that all enemies attack them for free immediately. Usually each mini can sucker punch once per round. Again, more objectives are revealed as the players do them. The hostile just reads them aloud. That's all you need to know for now. Pros! Starting with the component pros, we want to say that the minis are freaking sick, and you get a ton of them. You got the operatives, which have molds that are quite distinct from each other. And check out their cool weapons. They sell that hero or lone super strong guy look quite well. As for the hordes of hostile units, they're gritty with slouch backs, weird weapons, and no shortage of face coverings and skulls. Check out the Stinger with a super long weapon. Then the Beastmaster really feels like he lets the dogs out with all these dogs he's running with. Boss minis or champions also look appropriately disgusting. Like, look at this spider who is actually just a human being just crawling around on all 4s. Wait, the scene from Mad Max Fury Road really reminded me of this. But maybe Degenesis Spider-Man is more jacked up and weird. Next for components is all the sick art in this game, which really makes the world come to life on all the cards and character design. There's all sorts of different types of poses and art with a very distinct, consistent dark style. Ones that really jumped out to me are the Arcana cards. These look like I'm getting the best of the best in channeling dark energies. The graphic design of the rulebook and scenario booklet are also pretty. It just feels like a gaming magazine while going through it, with its different colored, good feeling paper, and then different print fonts and boxes to organize things. More on this later though. Before gameplay pros, we want to praise the Degenesis efforts in creating this post-apocalypse universe, with lots of flavor text in the scenario booklet, rulebooks, and there's even these in memoriam death cards to read out when you die. Like, let's look at the effort they put into the characters. Aviv is supposed to be a shepherd who waves a ram staff while holding incense, and he's a Jahamid, which I'm pretty sure is a stand-in for Islam, Muhammad versus Jahamid, right? Anyways, he's full of religious phrases as he takes damage. Backs of items will also have these one-liners from characters to really sell what's going on in the game as you flip them. By the way, the operatives have their own flavor text with character backstories and descriptors for the clan they're in. Operative clans actually mean something in the game besides just flavor text, because they can interact with scenario happenings, and when we looked at locked characters, we noticed that clan strife prevented two operatives from playing with each other. The flavor text intersects with the gameplay really well at the beginning of missions when you have to buy intel. Operatives are given short blurbs of each intel they can buy. Buying is giving the hostile these strong arcana cards, so the players really have to think about what is useful or not in the context of this world. Example, let's go. Mission 1. Scouts reported a small patrol breaking off from the rear guard to observe the surrounding area. Luckily, they're weak enough to be picked off by a few auxiliary units.
Something about the high profile unit.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I think that's kind of important, so let's just try that.
Now it's time for gameplay pros. And first we want to start with the asymmetry and how they did the one, that is the hostile by himself, versus the many, which is the operative. The lone hostile player is playing a secrecy and numbers game with lots of starting units that are all face down. Face down units are a big strength of theirs, where you can hide intentions really well of what units are. Helps that there's traps and decoys he can put down with other units for free. One hallmark of the Legion is to use Brood Call, which happens once a round when a swarmer, aka a middling unit, uses an action. This activates all feeders, aka the weakest unit. You can move them 2 spaces, you can attack with them, etc, etc. This really rewards the hostile for spacing accordingly, because look, would you look at that, all decoys are treated as feeders, so they also move. Okay, individual attacks for most of the hostile units aren't the strongest, with each unit only having 1 HP, but you can use Legion, which sacrifices weak units to add dice onto an attack roll. Best case scenario 2, a threat gets to trigger ambush to get a free attack. So that is putting pressure on the operatives to spend actions to scout them. This is added onto how the hostile player gets to see everything about the mission in the booklet, so they get to choose how to reveal information. And so they can plan around their secret objectives that the operatives might not know about until they're completed. There is just a lot the hostile is able to do, with each unit having special abilities, and then the lowest tier even able to obscure its tile to protect fellow troop. And the hostile can pass their turn to save up edges, while the operative can't do that. The hostile can also summon champions, the strongest boss unit. We've only seen the spider so far, but man, these are gritty for the operatives to deal with. Look at this, getting to flip an operative stance. They also have different stages as they drop in HP, giving you a nice narrative to play around. Overall, they're just fittingly scary for the operatives to deal with. Now, for the operatives, they're pretty much the exact opposite as the hostile. They don't really know anything about the mission besides a brisk debriefing and only have each other to lean on. They can't spawn more guys in, unlike the hostile. Luckily, they each start with 2 super cool passives in the form of potentials, aka health, and 3 starting items. They even have more passives on the focus versus primal size to their characters. More on individual operative coolness later, but playing the operatives is much more of a tricky guessing of what the hostile has on the board, what objectives might be if they haven't been revealed yet, and especially how they should sequence their turn. Okay, but to understand operatives better, we have to get closer to the primal versus focus mechanic, which is the duality of man as each operative has 2 different sides. These sides, each with their own actives, passives, defense, and dice pools, are this tactical commitment to figure out what part of the game you want to focus on doing now. The focus is usually better at doing range stuff, and is the only mode in which the operative can scout. But the primal side sometimes has more of a dice pool, and is the only mode where the operative can attack with your bare hands, because that's a primal thing, right? Oftentimes, operative gameplay is deciding what stance to be in as you anticipate what the hostile will do on their turn, and or how many actions your team has left. Stances also affect what items you can use, and now let's get into these, because they're really cool. Each item has all these descriptors and effects to make them feel like unique, real things in this world. How about this long stick that lets you attack melee from afar because it's so long? Or this area attack stun? Or this cool book you can read to make one die roll really, really good, but then you finish reading the book. There's nothing left to read, you can't use it anymore. The fact that items have different backs means that more things can happen when you botch a roll. See this fungicide rifle blowing up in your face if you fail and obscuring your tile. Or this DIY mace that is supposedly a work of art. It gives you secure 1 automatically. Oh, but then when it flips, it's automatically junk. You have to throw it away after the mission. See, items can tell a story even upon failure. So now when we go back to the operatives, they have all these stances and items and potentials, and it really fleshes them out and gives plenty of ways to mix and match operatives together with teammates to succeed. Okay, so now you know how this operative side works. Now we can get into the individual coolness of them. Now we've only played 5 out of the many in this box, so Let's go. Timur is your strong all-rounder who can do everything. He has a great melee and ranged attack that is an area attack. He can heal himself or any ally if unopposed, meaning no enemies in the space. He also protects allies leaving his tile, as they don't trigger sucker punches when doing so. Echo is a utility guy who is an insane scouter who always +3 his scout rolls when focused. Oh, he can also scout in any stance. His primary attack is a vocoder, which does an area attack stun, which by the way hits 2 spaces next to him instead of 1 because of his white noise potential. He can either be an optimized defense to +3 defense himself and not move, or start displacing enemies 3 spaces. Then there's Pluto, who is all about weapons. He can flip broken items on his space as an action, and can discard items instead of being wounded. Holy cow. The last of the initial operative is Führerbach, who I like to call German Clint Eastwood. Look, he is just a cowboy. Anyways, he's just fascinating in having 4 range with a musket that always flips over while attacking, and then you can flip it right over as an action. So if you happen to botch a roll with this guy, the musket doesn't break. He also has the Judge, Jury, and Executioner ability to choose an enemy and having all allies secure 1 against them this round. So he's great to point to a champion and say, we kill. The unlocked operative we played was a Shepherd, Aviv. He's like a protective tank. He can never get attacked off of an ambush, and when melee attacking, if he misses, he gets to displace. And displacing causes a sucker punch free attack because of leaving your tile, so you get to attack again. Now, we're looking at how there's 12 operatives in this box, so man, is there many other character designs to look forward to. Like there's this German guy who has a Biden-hander, okay, interesting name. Anyways, he can sucker punch people who walk up to him. There's even this operative expansion for 12 more operatives that are unlockables as you play the game. Here's one that loves to isolate opponents and gets rewarded in displacing more after isolating. Oh my gosh, there's just so many more operatives. Let's just continue with the rest of the gameplay pros, otherwise we'll be here forever. The next gameplay pro is a dice system, where they made some interesting additions to add some difference to these miniature games where you will inevitably find yourself rolling twice a turn to attack. When you roll in Degenesis, it's always up to your dice pool. And since most of the dice have the dreaded botch, you're doing a little bit of a push your luck check with most rolls. There's more tension for this on the operative side since they have less actions, and botching on attacks flips their valuable weapons, which can sometimes mean permanent loss, at least for that mission. Then of course you can overcommit to roll more down every roll, as you may be pushing your average up, but you can be giving some Arcana card trickery to your opponent. Secure giving is also in a lot of cards we've seen, so you can set this up for big attacks too. Again, more things to make dice rolling more interesting when you're stuck in a brawl. Lastly, the scenarios do have a decent variety so far in what they ask you to do, ranging from a kill mission, then you have to escape, or they're stopping a ritual, then there's an escort mission, then the final mission we had was preventing hostiles from getting to an endpoint with a trench in the middle, with a machine gun to use. Wait, is this like World War I trench warfare where only one side has a machine gun now? Well, I guess the Protectorate are the bad guys anyways. Cons. Component cons time. And again, this is a prototype, so we're not judging the game too harshly for the. I mean, I have no idea how the game will actually be packaged. We were told this box was prepared specifically for us. Like the previous version of these operative envelopes actually closed when you sealed them, now they just kind of open by themselves. For the minis though, we wish that the good guy minis were differentiated by colored bases, because I know you might paint them, but as is, everything can look like a mass of gray when you're fighting each other. As it is commonplace in Cool Mini or not, they provide colored bases to miniatures, so hope they do that for at least the operatives here. Some tokens also kind of just look the same for their varied uses, and sometimes tricky to differentiate from far away. The most annoying here is how the front of threats all look the same. Like you have the art of these guys, why not use them? This made setting up each scenario a pain when preparing the threats for the hostile. This one I really hope they change for the main version, because the beginning of the rulebook has these components all showed the same way we got them, but fingers crossed. Also, the threat symbol happens to be the same exact symbol as botching. What's up with that? If this is intentional, it's just weird to see the botch symbol on the board constantly. For the board, sometimes it's hard to tell what spaces are which, because the black line dividing most spaces from each other looks a lot like the black line created when you put 2 pieces of board together. This is compounded onto how spaces aren't uniform, so it does take a hot second to see how spaces are truly like. Maybe make these lines darker, since I do agree that black does work well. Oh, and then some spaces are way too small to fit more than 2 minis on them, let alone some bigger ones. But then again, the game board would have to be bigger to allow this, but it's already so big, so it's kind of a rough consequence of making some spaces really big and some really small. Oh yeah, easily forgotten rules. That sounds like the rulebook. So we were saying it's pretty before. It is pretty, but it's kind of frustrating to go through. The main culprit of this is that there's a lot of keywords in this game, and the glossary doesn't have a lot of them. Things like sucker punch, hidden, or stealth aren't there. Why not? Well, it's because either they're explained in the action tab or ability tab or something within a scenario. So basically just everywhere. Very confusing because first you jump to a glossary to try to find something, right? You're gonna have a glossary include everything. The rulebook also needs to be more clear on when a hostile is forced to reveal threats aside from when they're scouted. We ruled it as a when it attacks, it must flip, since there's a swarmer that can literally attack while unrevealed. So that makes sense on why attacking while in threat mode would normally reveal you. It was really made apparent to me that you don't have to reveal unless you really have to when we had different hostile players. When I was hostile, I would always reveal my units before doing something with them. For example, laying down a trap. But then when you put down that trap, they know what it is. It's clearly a trap. But then when my friend did it, he would use an unrevealed thing to put down another unrevealed thing. So it could either be a trap or a decoy. This changes the game immensely for the hostile. So why not just explain it in the rules? Last thing about the rules, then we'll move on, is if things have a keyword stack on top of each other like secure. So does a secure 3 attribute stack on top of a secure 1? This would mean you have a secure 4? Probably, but we couldn't find this clarified in the rules. Now on to the mission booklet. Just like the rulebook, it looks pretty. But the way it's structured is in a really weird, frustrating way. So the setup is after half the information, which means you actually have to keep flipping back and forth during gameplay. Why not have the flavor text and initial premise be first, then the setup, then the objectives all on the same page. Then the next pages could include some additional rules if necessary. Things are just not labeled clearly either. It was hard to follow objectives since they're kind of just in a giant block of text. Also, if there's a round limit, which there is in some scenarios, that should be made crystal clear from the start. Other things are just not explained and you have to figure out yourself, like OSP. What does that mean? That's not a component. Oh, it's an operative spawn point. Or what is this little SW on the board? Oh, that's scrapper wreckage. Maybe this would be more obvious if you didn't have the mini. Also, the little icons next to the tiles are currently a bit of a lie. There's no markings for the tiles. Perhaps the mission could mention somewhere every single special component you need. Oh, there's also flavor text sometimes thoroughly mixed in with the mechanics and setup information, so that can be annoying. Also, for a game where the hostile is supposed to be reading out information for the operatives, well, how much exactly are you supposed to read out? Do you talk about the mission end or talk about what happens after you complete an objective? So then we just assume that, well, the hostile just reads out whatever they want. But then in that case, shouldn't the game be encouraging me to read certain parts more than others? I'm equating this to my TTRPG experience, like in Dread, where they tell the GM a primer on what to share, what is good to reveal over time, etc, etc. But anyways, scenarios should be as clear as possible for the hostile player to understand. After all, if you mess up reading something here, you have to restart the scenario, but restarting the scenario isn't very smooth in this game because then the operatives kind of know where some of the hidden things are. The final component con is the wording of Legion in the hostile player aid, where it says you can sacrifice units to gain dice. Okay, makes sense, until you see that there's 3 different types of dice. So do you just get to add any of them that you want? Adding a red die is a lot different than adding a white die, so we just ruled it as you get to add 1 white die, the weakest for each mini you sacrifice. Gameplay cons time. Now let's talk about the biggest one, which is the Arcana cards. And these are some of the most ridiculously swingy cards we've ever seen in a Ameritrash game. If you top deck the right ones and use them properly, you pretty much just win the game when using them. First of all, they can be used at any time. Here are some really busted ones. Do automatic 1 damage. Okay, amazing as the hostile because they normally just have 1 health minis. Or here you cannot be attacked outside your tile this round. Then there's cards to draw more from the deck to make it more likely to see the busted ones. Or there's this one to literally get any card to your hand. Like, what the heck? Here's what happened in a game we played. I attacked at range 3. Then the hostile played this Arcana to move me 3 spaces. Because you know, you can do this anytime you want. So now I was in his space with a ton of enemies and trying to do the ranged attack when I had enemies in my space, which means I get sucker punched. So I get hit 4 times before even firing and died from full health. This doesn't even include the trap that would have gone off. See how you wouldn't want to give Arcana to your opponent if there's any chance something game breaking like this happens? Okay, not all Arcana are mad broken. Some are just really amazing. Like this one's flipping an item. This is +5 defense. This is 2xing each attack. Yeah, see, really good, but not as broken, you see? Then others are situationally good, like after roll add 3 botches. Good if they have a lot of secure, or reveal all threats in a spot. That's okay, but then hiding all roaches in a spot, man, that is amazing for the hostile to do some ambush shenanigans. I don't really know how you would fully fix Arcana. They're kind of just designed to be a very swingy thing that one deck is for both players, which is already a janky idea to begin with. But here's some ideas we had that would alleviate the insanity while still keeping it one deck. 1. Lock certain Arcana cards until later in the campaign where you have stronger operatives that can deal with them more. This would shrink the Arcana deck as well, so it's easier to guess what your opponent can draw. 2. Create a designated window for Arcana cards to be played so you can't just whip it out mid-attack. Like have them able to be played at start of round or something. And then maybe make players have to spend to play them somehow. 3rd solution, just take out all the strong Arcana cards and replace them with more incremental bonuses, like a +2/1 attack or flip 2 threats face down. Now let's delve into the Sucker Punch mechanics where we just discussed that can lead to up to 4 free attacks in one turn. This makes a lot of sense at first. It's locking units with you when you're thematically in a fight, so you can't just escape for free. And you can only Sucker Punch once a round. It makes sense until it doesn't thematically and mechanically. So let's go. It's ruled that if someone does a ranged attack, a Sucker Punch goes off against them. Well, let's say that you have also a ranged weapon, so you're Sucker Punching with a ranged weapon? That seems very odd thematically. Plus, doing a ranged attack at range 0 means that there's no downside for using them to Sucker Punch. To this end, we would say just allow players to Sucker Punch back at range 0 barehanded, even if not in Primal. Sucker Punch also makes the hostile getting any sort of displace benefit, usually from Arcana, as we've seen so far, mad strong, as it doesn't really matter if Sucker Punch is limited to once per round for each mini when you have so many minis, right? We really hope that later in the campaign doesn't have the hostile just spamming displace. Sucker Punch can just make the game into a tar pit where you're incentivized to just sit still and just attack the person in front of you because doing other things would usually involve into you getting attacked for free. There really needs to be a way for at least operatives to move out of a space without getting Sucker Punch. Because sometimes, let's say you're in a space like this, yeah, you're not gonna move out because you're gonna get Sucker Punch 5 times, so you just sit still. The next gameplay con is that some operatives have some weirdness in how they actually play. We're only gonna go over the initial operatives for this, but let's start with my favorite edgy cowboy, Führerbach. He's actually just really weird in forcing the hostile to always target him. So this can kind of break the game, right? First, the wording is very unclear because it could be interpreted that the hostile has to spam actions again and again with the same mini instead of using different minis, which of course some of which would be out of range. Definitely doesn't seem the case that you're locked in to do one mini over and over. It's just that minis within range, if activated, have to attack, but again, should be elaborated. Hypothetically, we can still see a case where Führerbach gets loaded up with a bunch of defense, say the best armor, and just sits down and denies the hostile from ever doing anything. Like he already has a +2 defense when outnumbered. Like you can make a strong case that endgame, you should just be doing this constantly if you have 7+ defense. Again, as we said in the pros, Führerbach is cool design. He's a cool cowboy who likes to just read his book and shoot his musket from afar and then take time to reload it. Since he's a judge, which is kind of like police in this theme, the hostile despise him, so they want to always kill him. He just needs to be retweaked so that he doesn't just break certain scenarios. We could really make this passive and active in luring the hostile. The other one is Timur, who is actually just the best operative we've seen by a long shot. As we said in the pros, he's a great all-rounder, but what we didn't say is that he's a little too good at everything he wants to do. His base roll pool is double black for both sides, making him the strongest on average for any check. Then let's look at his weapons. Splayer is a melee attack that has range 1. Wow, that's great versatility. And then he gets +2 defense for the round after landing a hit, like sheesh. Or maybe you want to success +2 before a melee attack in your space, so you can displace the enemy instead of wounding it. Why would you do that? Because displacing causes a Sucker Punch from you for free. Then his fungicide rifle for range is an area attack with pretty much no downside. You can just kill a ton of hostile off this. If it worst case blows up off botching, Timur doesn't take the penalty because he has a suit that makes him immune to the chemicals. Also, if Timur takes damage, don't worry. If he's not with baddies, he can heal himself with this ability. If him and an ally are by themselves, he can heal them for 2 health. Playing Timur makes the operatives feel like they're playing on an easier difficulty, at least in the missions we play. Now let's go to the other side with the hostile, which has some character, or should I say cockroach design, that feels a little bit odd. Simply put, there's just too many lieutenants that don't feel actively important. Here's a Mauler that barely rolls better than the lowest tier, and her ability is to destroy herself after doing a double attack, which sounds fine, except that it's dying, not removing. Dying contributes towards many operative victory conditions. Like compare that to a calculator who can put down a decoy for free, then attacks for 2 range at a slightly lower die roll. Let's go to another lieutenant or swarmer, the Stinger, who can attack with range 2 without revealing himself. No other character can do this, so the moment the Stinger attacks, it's obvious that's him. And since he's ranged, you're probably not gonna ambush with him, right? Also, his attack is hilariously worse than the feeders. Okay, one last one. The Vanguard. He has an attack, again, worse than the feeders, and it's just protecting them in his space, which isn't really that useful, at least in our previous scenarios. Okay, here's how we would do it. Just combine a lot of these guys together. Have the archer and the stinger be one character. You can have a unit that attacks at 6 range that doesn't reveal himself. Or let's have a ranger plus the vanguard, a unit that ignores move penalties and also protects others. How it is now is that most of the time you just spam trappers and cacklers since they give you stuff for free. Then you just pick one swarmer of your liking, tell brood call them to move them around. You don't really need to spawn swarmers after that, just spam more feeders. Or get the highest tier warrior since it costs the same to spawn anything. Is it a good idea that everything costs the same to spawn? Could there have been more room for progression within a scenario to unlock stronger units to spawn? Like how about having swarmers do a bunch of a certain thing to progress into warriors? So now let's get into the scenarios. So we mentioned in the component cons that they're a little bit hard to follow. So let's just get into the jankiness of some of the scenarios. I am going to be talking about some minimal spoilers for these initial scenarios here, so feel free to jump ahead if that thing bothers you. Scenario 1 has both sides trying to kill each other. Well, the operatives start at an advantage with the central high ground. So you know what the hostile should do? Just camp in the corner and spawn units until they're properly strong, which isn't a fun thing for anyone. Like, what are the operatives supposed to do during that? Scenario 2 is the wackiest, where the operatives start in stealth, meaning they have +1 movement and can't get targeted by anything. The goal for them is to just put out a fire on the other side of the map. So what should they do then? Just sprint. But since they can't get targeted, the hostile can't do anything either, except maybe just put down traps. Oh, what if we put down traps in the fire area that has obscure because of the fire? So then the beginning of the scenario is just entirely railroaded once you figure this out. And then it's just an RNG die roll to see how much trap damage the operatives take. Also, the timing seems off here because this scenario ends after 7 rounds, where maybe it should have been ending closer to when you put the fire out on probably round 3. Or maybe the scenario can shorten once you put down the fire. The rulebook says that you can retreat if the operatives give up, but you have to go to the operative spawn point, which is sometimes a lot of work to haul yourself across the map, and then this technically loses you the mission anyways. So we just house ruled this scenario too, that it ends once the first objective, that is putting out the fire, is done. To prevent game states from just dragging and to put more tension on players, just institute a time limit on every scenario. Some scenarios have it, others do not. Since there's no exhaustion in this game like Gloomhaven, rather each side can take all the time they want. This can lead to really bloated time lengths of 2.5 to 3 hours. This hurts even more when operative players get eliminated and just have to sit there doing nothing. Actually, we noticed that the campaign as a whole has no way of self-balancing, which really caught our eye because at the end of scenarios, you get perks depending on how well you did. One crazy thing here is that operatives are getting a random potential from their clan pool. So that could be one of 7 things. We haven't tested all of these, of course, but what happens if they get a really crazy one to just shoot ahead? Or what if they just lose a lot of missions in a row? If you die in a mission, your operative's completely removed from the game. So if you have no more operatives left to use, the campaign just ends. That's not fun for anyone. We really don't think framing the game as if the hostile should win or can win is a good idea, given how there's so many balance issues anyways. Yeah, this really led us to the conclusion that the hostile should actually be playing the game close to a TTRPG game master host to just facilitate a great time for the players. I mean, the hostile is choosing how to reveal or hide information anyways with complete autonomy and can draw some ridiculously busted arcana cards to easily kill some operatives. It's just a casual approach to complete the campaign and essentially tweaking missions as you go. The final con before scoring is that the best player count is a weird, unanswerable question. We're not really sure what's the best player count. Initially, we were thinking that 2 operatives is the best since you can have 2 turns with each for more decision making instead of 3 to 4 operatives where you only have 1 turn with each. But with 2 operatives, you're reducing the chance to get the right tools to defeat the hostile. And then once one operative dies, the other one is just kind of screwed by themselves. But with 2 operatives, you're reducing the chance to get the right tools to defeat the hostile. You have the same amount of items per player count. Also, you always start the game with 2 potentials to cite player count. Our solution was to just say, screw it, except that 2 operatives will leave the operative team maybe a bit short-handed for more favorable gameplay. With 2 edges, the operatives can decide to do back-to-back turns. Just make sure you take the right operatives. We found that Timur plus anyone that isn't Fearbach tends to be a pretty winning team. Scoring! Now it's time for a tentative score on this prototype of Degenesis Clan Wars, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea. And so, the Degenesis Clan Wars, this prototype is going to get a 4 out of 10. It is below average. Degenesis Clan Wars has a lot of style and ambition, featuring compelling operatives with their deep toolkits versus the hostile player who's playing a type of secret chess moving around with the cockroaches while revealing information when necessary. And, well, this is kind of inherently just a janky premise, a 1 versus all campaign with randomized unlockables for the operative. And botching a roll for the operatives means flipping over an item, which can mean all sorts of things, from whatever to really bad. I couldn't stop help thinking about Descent 2nd Edition when it first came out, where it was the solo player's job to just facilitate a good time for the adventure. The fun of the group playing prevailed over the person piloting the game winning. In Degenesis, the best approach is from having a good hostile player who reveals information at an appropriate pace, possibly stifling their punches and not playing some Arcana cards when applicable. But then the booklets don't encourage this type of gameplay. It just throws you out there with confusing rulebook and scenario booklet. It's really putting the burden on the hostile player to come up with the mindset themselves of withholding information. And best case, they should just prep the mission beforehand and reading the booklet and setting up the map. Another slightly disjointed thing is how the world and how it meets gameplay. Sure, this is post-apocalyptic, so weirdness is bound to happen, but some stuff is a little too weird in the game. Like there's heavy-handed flavor text for the missions at the beginning of each playthrough, and then there's almost no more flavor during the rest of the mission. Only other written flavor is from one-liners from items being flipped, which is definitely thematic, but can seem more zany as guns blow up in your face or your character shrugs off from a flesh wound. Also, must I remind you, you have these flintlock pistols called muskets that are from like the 18th century or earlier, and then you also have these sci-fi weapons. These are on the same team as each other. How is this even working? I don't know. I mean, looking at more art we grab from online, there's a lot more sci-fi. You got cowboys traveling, and then somehow the technology can move these high-tech exoskeletons. Maybe we'll learn more about the science or background as we learn more about the government protectorate later in the campaign, but there's nothing in the demo that made me see how the world was constructed or how it works day to day. And how the world building was experienced was also kind of how the game was experienced. It's a cool world with cool mechanical ingredients that doesn't always really make much sense, so you just have to fill in the blanks yourself. There's religion, clan strife, cockroach scouting parties galore, and an evil government protectorate that must fall, according to the box, that will do anything to maintain order. Did anything I say there have impact on gameplay? No, not really, but it does paint a cool picture of what's going on. I just injected some cool, and the cool doesn't always work smoothly, but it's still cool. And if you like the theme, can you imagine what type of post-apocalyptic scenarios can get cooked up with all these new operatives versus all these new champions and all the terrain? And there's even more giddiness to be had if you buy the operative expansion, which adds 12 more characters, one of which enters when Führerbach dies, so maybe he's intentionally supposed to die. Or you can even get a new set of characters when your team gets completely wiped and now you have a get out of jail free card. So wow, this is injecting more cool into the game to possibly alleviate the operatives ever falling behind. We don't really know for sure, but if you want tons of new things to play around with no matter what happens in the campaign, get this expansion. In Degenesis, you have to chuckle at rolling a botch, so your fungicide rifle explodes in your hands on the second turn and hurts everyone in your space. Or someone rolls a ton of botches on the 1/6 chance for each die, while the other side gets all integers after a massive brute call. Or the hostile says, oops, I misread some information in the scenario, so we kind of have to fudge the rules a bit. Or maybe I won't tell anyone, because it's more fun how we accidentally house ruled it. Or that the spider monster champion you got so close to defeating suddenly got healed by an Arcana card. That's okay, this game really isn't for min-maxers. A couple more unanswered questions we have. Do missions get extremely long if operatives are hitting their 5 potentials max for 10 HP? Does a hostile ever get to unlock more warriors, since 2 seems a bit low, although we do know they get these swarm cards? Will there be any more Protectorate clan strife narratives throughout the game? I mean, that is the name of the game, Clan Wars, and we haven't seen much of a connecting story yet. Man, Degenesis, you have my respect for trying to throw in all these cool things and just trying to make it work. Like, I'd rather you swing for the fences and then fall kind of short than for you to not have all these cool elements and just play it safe. The full version might fix a lot of the issues we said and be your 1 versus all campaign that you will likely house rule, because 1 versus all campaign is really hard to balance anyways. Despite the 4 out of 10 and the noticeable jank and maybe inconsistent outcomes in gameplay, it doesn't mean you can't have a fine time playing this game, as our shelf side plays indicates. Oh my god! Oh my god! My personal score of Degenesis Clan Wars is going to be a 6 out of 10. I actually have an above average time playing this. That's right, I actually kind of enjoy playing this game. I kind of enjoy it. It really has to do a lot with the theme though. I love post-apocalyptic worlds. I read all of Stephen King's The Gunslinger. I'm just getting more to Mad Max, and the character design and the world is just compelling to me here. Take playing Führerbach, for example, who feels like I'm in like the gunslinger himself. He just takes his flintlock and shoots someone and says, judge, jury, and executioner, bam. I mean, it's just such a funny mental image to me. When I play this game, my brain actually does something very funny and turns off, especially when playing the hostiles, because I just like the universe and don't want to micromanage everything perfectly. I remember watching my playthrough and seeing how many misplays I made. It's hilarious, but I had a great time in that scenario. That was definitely peak hostile enjoyment for me. Playing the hostile is getting a little too dangerously close to the edge of too many things to manage for such a Ameritrashy game, so I would rather just play the operative. Then for the operatives, peak enjoyment was using a Vive in the final mission to secure a hilltop with a heavy machine gun bunker mounted on a top. Then I was blasting away, mitigating tons of botch results through a Vive ability. That goes right into how dice rolling, despite for a system where you're sometimes rolling twice on a turn and passing, does push your luck enough to not be completely brain dead for me. Then the mind games of which threats are actually concerning and how to finish the objectives with my operative buddy is cool. I do enjoy the beginning of rounds, deciding who to target or who should get shielded this round and or what stance to take. However, when Degenesis falls apart, I feel like it really stumbles my enjoyment. Like, remember that part in cons where I talked about getting sucker punched 4 times in a row on one turn? That happened to me. I died. I've only played 2 turns and died, so I'm just sitting there, literally not doing anything for about 30 more minutes to 45 minutes to an hour. Well, I'm not too mad because I already played this game so much beforehand, so I know that every experience is not like this. What if that was my first time playing Degenesis? My personal score would probably be at least a 5. Some turns are just move forward and attack. Balance is pretty wacky. Scenario writing is confusing and too sparse, but I'm still kind of enjoying it. Anyways, the Degenesis Clan Wars is pure junk food gaming for me, and I'm kind of here for it. The reason why my personal score isn't a 5 is because there's just so much novelty I'm excited to see with all the different ingredients in this game. It gets me excited for the next game, but I know that there's gonna be a lot of jank. So yeah, we're gonna have to do some house ruling lore if I do play this again, but yeah, interesting game. We'll try to have a way to have scenarios not run longer than 2 to 2.5 hours. Man, the art in this game is so cool. I'm just gonna put it on screen again. Like, it's so cool. It is so cool. This being sent to us did not affect scoring. Also, you are cool for getting to the end of the video. You know who else is cool? Our patrons. Thank you guys over here. You guys help make these videos possible. We also got a Ko-Fi opening up in the link below, and we also got our patron. Yeah, I just said patron twice. We got our merch. Right, that's merch on our website. Anyways, we also got our Mad Lads of Cardboard over here. Anyways, remember to like the video, subscribe, comment what you think, and also, yeah, bye-bye.